If there's any defining moment in Philippine foreign policy as far as recent memory is concerned, it's of course the dispute in the Panatag Shoal or the Scarborough Shoal. It was the first time in many decades that the Philippines came very close to armed confrontation with another country. For months, the Philippine Navy and a number of Chinese vessels were at loggerheads, and the prospect for military confrontation was hanging over the horizon. The Scarborough Shoal or the Panatag Shoal crisis triggered a whole new thinking in Philippine foreign policy. For instance, President Aquino pushed for the acceleration of the modernization of the armed forces of the Philippines. Meanwhile, the Philippines also launched a legal warfare or lawfare against China by initiating an arbitration case under the United Nations Convention Law of the Sea. At the same time, the Philippines also pushed for closer military cooperation with the United States, an effort that culminated after rounds and rounds of negotiations in the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or the EDCA. But what did really happen during the Scarborough Shoal crisis? Who is to blame? To better understand the Scarborough Shoal or the Panatag Shoal crisis and the Philippines' strategic challenges in the West Philippine Sea, we have someone very special to talk to tonight. Here's someone who has served in the armed forces of the Philippines, particularly the Philippine Navy, for years and decades, and someone who also understands the challenges that the Philippines is going to face and has been facing for quite some time. Good evening. Joining us tonight is retired Rear Admiral Rommel Jude Ong. Thank you very much, Admiral. Can I call you Admiral? Yeah. Or Professor, of course. I know also you teach at Ateneo de Manila University. Professor of Practice, right?
Whatever's your pleasure.
Okay. Thank you very much again, Admiral, for joining us. There's a lot to talk about. My goodness, the Philippines right now is in the midst of, you could call it a new Cold War, right? And in many ways, we're at the very front line of this, or kind of a front row seat, at least for some of us. But before talking about all of these issues, EDCA, what some call China's sharp power operations, the risks, the opportunities and challenges, Admiral, can we get to know a little bit about you, your background? How did you end up in the Philippine Navy? And you know, whatever you're comfortable to share with us, like, ano yung mga experiences nyo? What are the highlights of your career? Things that made you quite happy, encouraged? How was it? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, to be brief, no?
Take your time, it's okay. You don't mind.
More than 35 years in the service of Philippine Navy. I entered 1987 after graduating sa academy. Then I went through the motions, of course, all the career requirements. I work operations, intelligence, and at some point, strategic planning.
Right.
Okay. So I used to command Naval Forces West, that's in Palawan.
Right, West Command, yeah.
I worked for Western Command sometime 2017. Then my last post was Vice Commander, so that's the number 2 of the Navy.
Right.
And I retired in 2019.
Right. Admiral, first of all, like, do you have a family background in the military? Is something that took you in the direction of joining
well, my
Navy in particular?
My late father was also in the Navy.
Right.
He retired as a captain. He passed already a few years ago. So I think I took inspiration from him. Although may struggle yun eh. Kasi,
right.
No father would admit na
this one is better or something like that?
No, that he instigated me to join the academy.
Oh, right,
Kasi my mother
right.
would have mamalasin siya sa mother ko eh. But, so
it was subtle inspiration or something like that.
Subtle inspiration, yeah.
Was there something in particular with your father's career that inspired you about the Philippine Navy, or it was just some inertia thing? This is what I grew up with, this is what I best know, maybe it's my thing.
I would say it's inertia.
Inertia, yeah.
I always joke with my classmates, you know, sabi ko, I was born in the Navy.
Right.
Okay.
Literally
born into the Navy.
Yeah.
Then the only time I was out of the Navy was 4 years. And that was when I was in the academy.
Right.
Then I went back to the Navy.
So much for being out of the Navy.
So
it's just in the. This is the Philippine Military Academy, or
yeah,
yeah,
yes,
okay,
yes.
just to be clear. Okay, Admiral, ano yung kalagayan ng, what was the situation with the Philippine Navy when you joined, or what is your understanding of the evolution of the Philippine Navy? Because the Philippines is one of the biggest archipelagic nations out there, next to Japan, Indonesia. By nature, this should be a Navy-driven kind of country, right? I mean, ano yung kalagayan ng Navy, and how has it evolved, improve, or not improve over time from your experience, and also experience of your dad's experience? What you witnessed back in the day? Yeah.
Well, that's the struggle ng Navy, no?
Right.
And it's beyond the Navy actually. It's how we look at ourselves as a nation. Kasi tayo, archipelagic state
Correct.
tayo eh. And yet, we think like a continental nation.
Land
Okay?
army. Yeah.
Land-centric tayo. And
Why do you think so? Is it because of circumstances of the insurgency? Is it because of certain doctrinal inheritance from, I don't know, Americans? I don't know, although U.S. has a massive U.S. Navy also. What's going on there? What do you think were the factors that contribute to us to being much more land-driven
well, it has-
nation in terms of our defense
yeah,
capabilities?
I think it has to do with the historical DNA ng ating military or ng our forces. We started out revolution, then later on the Americans came.
You mean Aguinaldo?
Yeah.
General Aguinaldo, yeah.
Then Americans came, then kumbaga we were designed to be a constabulary force.
Correct.
And that gained traction over the years, over the decades. Hindi na wala yun eh, until such time na, of course, pumasok na yung hook-balak problem.
Right.
Then later on, yung martial law. Then after that, tumaas yung, nag-spike yung insurgency.
Right.
So we never gotten out of that cycle na
Right.
yung instability within the country ang primary security concern natin.
So it's what you're saying here is that the incomplete and fraught nation building project in itself kind of conspired to prevent us from developing that kind of outward looking, etc. Because I mean, I think about, for instance, the American example, right? It was not really until Thayer Mahan and it's in the late 19th century when America was comfortable as a continental power that they began to venture out. And we'll discuss also later on with China also. They had very unsafe land borders, to the north, to the east, and all of that. So to the west, sorry, and all of that. So what you're saying is that the circumstances for nation building, the struggles and traumas, kind of prevented us from
I
being.
think we are still a work in progress in terms of nation building. And siguro until such time that we are able to resolve yung internal conflicts
Right.
natin as a people, doon lang tayo magpo-progress to finally realize that we are actually a maritime nation.
Should it be mutually exclusive, like step 1, 2, or can't it be kind of simultaneous? Like, while we're kind of sorting out the domestic stuff, we kind of have to care about the fact that we have one of the fifth, sixth longest baselines in the world and so much vulnerability out there.
It takes someone to lead.
Right.
Kumbaga,
Visionary.
Vision
Yeah.
at the top. Then you need it, kumbaga meron ding push from the
From below,
stakeholders,
yeah.
from the community.
Bottom up, yeah. Do you think we'll have our own kind of a Mahan figure or something like that? Those kind of legendary naval strategic thinkers that got influence over certain. I think Theodore Roosevelt, for instance, right, was very much influenced by Mahanian thinking, and that kind of also shaped American strategy, right, towards the 19th century. Unfortunately, the victim was Philippines eventually, right? I know it kind of sounds. I feel strange about explaining this, but I'm just trying to understand, like. It's not like you're born as a naval power. It's a process, right?
Yeah.
There are exceptions in history. Maybe you can talk about United Kingdom or England, but a lot of countries became naval power over time, right? China, now US, a century earlier. So I'm just trying to figure out, maybe hindi tayo ganun ka-hopeless case, or maybe
Hindi naman.
some along the way we can, yeah.
There's an argument that we used to be a sea power,
Right.
and that was during the time na yung
Right.
Holo was the center of activities. In fact,
Right.
maybe you can say that the first Navy actually were the pirates from
Right.
Holo.
Right. And they were one of the first polities, right? Full-fledged polities who had diplomatic relations, including with Ming China, if I'm not mistaken. Well, I think there was a fantastic book called kind of like Empire of the Seas, right? So we're talking Majapahit, Srivijaya, Holo. So you're right. And the reason why I say this is, I know we might be digressing, but our very people we can trace them all the way to Madagascar, right? I mean,
Correct.
they crossed the Indian Ocean. And the reason why I mentioned this, Admiral, is that whenever I hear our friends in China saying, "Oh, our ancestor passed through that," and they talk about, their legendary admiral, who by the way was a Muslim and came from Central Asia, I would say, wait, our people were by nature sea people. I mean, barangay comes from balangay, right? These were the vessels we used to cross oceans,
That's
right?
Okay.
So it's actually in our DNA to be Navy people, right? And somehow the modern nation building project diluted that, and it's a matter of us going back to our roots. I know this is sounding a little bit academic and all, but
Yeah.
I want to have this conversation with someone who comes from Navy, because I believe you know what I'm talking about here, right?
Kumbaga, it's like an arrested development
Yeah, right.
on our part as a maritime nation, and you can trace back to history when that stopped. Okay, maybe that when pumasok yung mga Spaniards dito,
Right,
that was the initial steps ng arrested development natin
right.
as a maritime nation.
I just feel this is important because I don't think there's enough discussion. It's like it's a given, Philippines, military, army dominated, sige tignan natin ang gagawin natin sa Navy. But for me, as someone who does history, right? Like, wait lang, barangays, Madagascar, Indian Ocean, empires of the seas. This is very much in our DNA. I'm also mentioning this, Admiral, because of course I try to study what's happening in our neighboring countries. Like my sense is Indonesia's had similar problems to us. They had a large, the TNI, etc. But my sense is Indonesia is starting to try to develop its own naval capabilities. I think we buy warships from them, some of the vessels we bought. So they have a modicum of trying to build a naval industrial military complex, etc., right? And my sense is Philippines kind of doesn't have that. The reason I ask this is because I remember very well a few years ago when the Hanjin Yard issue came about. And then suddenly it kind of, I'm not sure, was it Secretary Lorenzan or something, who said something like, we need to build some facility for our Navy, etc. And then I got to know, minsan walang parking lot, yung mga frigates natin, or something, like, ang daming private properties, etc., pero walang parking lot. So I was wondering, like, what's going on? It's actually worse than I thought, right? So can you expound on that?
Well, the problem with modernization is, kumbaga parang bumili ka ng kotse, you forgot.
The maintenance.
No, na kailangan palang garage.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay, so
Yeah.
more often than that, it's an issue of resources. Kumbaga, you trade off yan eh. Which do you prioritize? The garage
Right.
or the car? At that time, we need the car first. Okay.
Makes
But at
sense.
some point, you need to build a garage. Okay.
Yeah.
So, dito, ano naman eh, complementary naman eh, acquisition of platforms, then base development.
Right.
But of course, in the trade-off of, you have to juggle funds to get ahead. Eh.
Right.
So sometimes in terms of prioritization, some get in first, the others less
Right.
priority.
Admiral, so you get in 1987, right? Essentially into the service. Obviously, this is post-EDSA, new regime, a lot of transition. Within few years, another major transition. U.S. forces leave their permanent bases in Subic and all. Can you tell us a little bit from what you remember? What was the impact of these major transitions? How did you guys absorb it and adopt accordingly? Or were we able to even adopt? What was going on there? Did it even make sense for us not to have permanent foreign bases anymore? I mean, yes, in principle, yes, but were we really in a position to be on our own? Can you tell us a little bit? Because this is a very important phase, right? Post-EDSA transition, post-American based transition, and then boom, mischief reef happens.
Okay. Siguro, ang proper framing nito is
Right.
when we kicked out the US in Clark and Subic, dapat may counterpart action on the part of national government, which
Exactly.
is to infuse support for modernization ng armed forces, not only the Navy. But kinulang tayo, then yung Asian financial crisis hit us something, I think, 96 or 97.
7, yeah.
Yeah. But ang importante dito we should consider is, nung nawala yung US bases, there's a saying, di ba, power hates a vacuum.
Right. Nature abhors a vacuum.
Oh, yeah.
Nature,
Nature abhors a vacuum. So when we kicked out the US from Subic and Clark, it created a vacuum. 2 years later, we have mischief reef.
Right. So the mischief reef is actually 1994, not 1995. Because the reason I say is because they were saying, oh, it became kind of 1995 because we didn't even know what was happening in 1994 kasi wala tayong domain awareness. Is that true? na the Chinese were doing a lot of things we were not even aware of how deep and serious this
Hindi
was.
naman. Kasi 1994, we still dominate the West Philippine Sea. Hindi pa West Philippine Sea yun noon.
Of course, we mean our exclusive economic
Yeah.
zone, not the entire South China Sea
Yeah,
basin.
yeah. We have I think, effective sea control of West
Right.
Philippines at that time. So, our ships patrol those areas.
Mm.
Even if yung ships natin ay luma na, no? But still, we are
Functional.
able to function. We are
Right.
able to enforce yung ating sovereign rights in our EEZ. I think the benchmark year na medyo nag-take off na sila would be around 2000 beyond.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
When they were already starting to build the Pillay Navy. But before that, we're dealing with fisherman's wharf, fisherman's shelter.
Right. Kind of gray zone that we'll discuss more.
Yeah.
Or was it gray zone, or was it like just wild, wild west there and everyone trying to just do their own thing there?
My sense is that they have this plan already years, decades
course.
ago. And they're trying to implement it incrementally whenever the opportunity arises.
Right. And my understanding is that the Chinese took a lot of inspiration, ironically, from Americans, right? Including Thayer Mahan, who was the guy who inspired America to be a naval power and dominate the Pacific and come all the way here, right? Going back to this, I mean, you as a young officer back then, how did you understand and absorb the process of Americans leaving and then the mischief happening? Were you feeling like, hindi tayo prepared, or was it a mistake? Like, what do you recall from those moments? It
Well,
must have been a difficult time for you guys in the Navy,
Hindi
right?
naman. Number one kasi ang problema natin noon at that time, majority of our logistics was stuck into support from the US.
Oh, right,
okay,
right,
so-
right.
Kumbaga, we are running an armed forces and only X% of it is under usually yung national funds natin.
Right.
And a substantial Y% of it is actually coming from support from the United States. So nung nawala yun, we have to rely on ourselves. Kaya nga sinabi ko kanina, there's a complementary action that should have been done by national government at the time. Pero hindi nag-take off yun.
Because what's your suspicion? It's a combination of factors. But you said bad economy, political transition, of course.
Yeah.
But wasn't there like kind of an institutional lobbying for that? Like, you know?
We are minsan reactive tayo in terms of policy making, decision making.
Yung strategic culture natin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct. We don't have a strategic culture.
Or the non-existent strategic culture,
Non-existent,
right? Yeah.
So, if you do not see a threat, parang okay lang.
Right.
So, at that time, wala tayong quote-unquote existential threat
Yeah.
on the horizon. So, there's no pressure to actually invest in defense at the time.
Was it also because, I mean, two things happening, right? The immediate one was kakatapos lang ng Cold War, wala na yung Soviet threats,
Yeah.
and then China is being integrated, Deng Xiaoping, all of those things. And some would say also, was it James Fallow said something like damage culture. The problem with the Philippines is that we've been so reliant on Americans for so long, or we kind of outsourced part of that it created an anti-strategic culture or a non-existent strategic culture. What do you say about that?
Well, in a way, yes. But you must look at also may isang aspect na hindi natin nakita yung there were a series of coup d'etat at the time.
Right.
So,
7, 8, yeah.
I mean,
Yep, you're right. The
they're
civil-military relations a mess.
So,
Yeah.
kumbaga, our political leaders have no stomach to invest in the military that has just
Try to
risen up.
Yeah, you're right. That's a good point.
That's another key factor.
That's a
then.
good point. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very important point.
And of course, yung insurgency at that time, mataas pa rin yung tempo noon.
Correct.
So you have a combination of the US pulling out, you have insurgency, then you have that series
The
of military coups that
relations,
actually shook kumbaga yung confidence ng ating political leaders and even our people to the armed forces at that time.
So now I can understand maybe why Corazon Aquino didn't want the Americans to leave, because like I'm not sure I want to rely on these people on our own, right? I mean, perhaps we were lucky in a way that Ramos became the next president, because I think he had what it took to kind of put things together, right? I mean, he kind of helped the civil-military relations to be on more an even keel.
Well, in a way,
There were no coups during his time, as far as I know, right?
wala na. At that, President Ramos, considering that he came from the armed forces, so
Right.
he has the gravitas to
Right.
say, boys, tumahimik kayo
Tama
dyan.
yan, yeah.
tama na kayo.
Yeah.
So the road to restoring democracy, kumbaga, tinapos niya yon. Yung sinimulan ni President Cory,
Correct.
tinapos ni President Ramos. Then we were already on the road to what we call security sector reform.
Right.
Looking at how do now I restore back the faith of the Filipino people sa armed forces. And that means you need to incorporate certain changes within the organization.
Right. Now, the reason I mentioned mischief reef is because, well, more or less within 2 decades, you have another major crisis, which is the Scarborough Shoal, right? And then later, of course, you get into the West Command and all. What was your recollection and reaction when the Scarborough Shoal crisis happened? Because my understanding is this should have been a job of a Coast Guard, but the Coast Guard did not have that capability by that time. Then we had Gregorio del Pilar, right? A frigate doing a job that supposedly Coast Guard was supposed to do. What is your point? Because for a lot of us, our understanding was lack of capacity made us some fatal mistake that gave the Chinese the pretext to come in big. And I know there's this notion of escalation dominance, right? When you're dealing with the adversary which has more capabilities, you don't want to escalate it. And the fact that we used a gray hull rather than a white hull Coast Guard gave the Chinese the perfect excuse they needed to come in and gobble up Scarborough Shoal. What is your take on the Scarborough Shoal situation and why it got out of control?
Okay, Scarborough Shoal was my mission kasi I was the task force commander of
Of
that.
course. So,
Okay, that was 2012. So,
enlighten us. Yeah, go ahead.
okay, it started off with a series of maritime surveillance reports that we got of quote-unquote white ships that were seen by our fisher folks that are around
The
Scarborough.
Coast Guard, you mean? Chinese Coast Guard? Yeah.
Wala pang Chinese Coast Guard noon.
Right, right.
At that time, we have what we call the 5 dragons.
Right, right.
The CMS, the FLEC.
Right, right.
Okay, so wala pang Chinese Coast Guard noon. So there was reports of a white ship. So I think the white ship na nakita nila are the CMS, the Chinese Maritime Surveillance Agency at the time. Wala na yon, na-integrate na yun sa Coast Guard nila. We were trying to validate that information. So ang ano namin dun is to conduct a patrol. Now, at that time, that's the role of the Navy. We call it sovereignty patrols.
Right. Which we do in Pag-asa, in other parts, yeah.
Kumbaga, par for the cause that we've been doing that for decades eh. And nobody asked, bakit walang Coast Guard doon? Okay? Kasi hindi trabaho ng Coast Guard yun noon.
Yes.
Okay? Ang trabaho ng Coast Guard doon was to actually secure yung domestic waters natin. Also yung they operate yung stations across different ports, ports natin. So that was their mission. So ang mission ng Navy was actually sovereignty patrol. Now, pumasok yung, we call it the white and white narrative that arose out of that incident. Now, where we're trying to debunk.
Okay, please go ahead. Because I could see you were giving me reactions when I said that. But I'll be honest, that's the mainstream narrative in academic literature. I'm not even talking about mainstream. I'm talking about academic.
That's the Chinese narrative that we adopted.
Aha, I
Kaya
see. So I apparently echoed Chinese line. Please correct me.
No, that was echoed in 2012.
Right, right.
So we bought into that narrative.
Right, right.
And we were, at that time, may traction na kasi. It gained traction immediately.
What was your position again back then? You said you were in charge of the kind of operations from
I
what?
was the task force commander at the time.
Task Force Commander. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Perfect person to ask that.
Yeah. So yun, then at some point we decided, okay, we need to patrol Scarborough Shoal. And we did. So we deployed yung Gregorio del Pilar, yung frigate number 15 at the time. Now at that time we were also trying to prove to ourselves
Right.
na merong network na sila existing between their maritime law enforcement agencies and their fisher folks.
Right.
Okay. So when
that this is not spontaneous, it's coordinated.
Coordinated. Okay.
Cabinet strategy, right? You send, yeah.
No, at that time,
Wala pa yung idea ng cabinet strategy. Yeah, yeah.
Actually, the Chinese also nagla-learning curve pa rin
Yeah,
sila.
of course. Yeah, yeah. They're just making up while you're moving.
So
yeah, yeah.
actually, the Scarborough Shoal incident was a watershed moment for them.
For everyone.
Kasi,
yeah, yeah.
kumbaga, ulala, sabi niya, meron pala, it works.
Yeah.
This is something we can develop. So yun nga nangyari. Anyway, so we did the patrol and we saw at least I think 8 or 9 Chinese fishing vessels doon sa inside the shoal. Then yung boarding team namin, sabi ko sa boarding team, okay, you bring in, magdala kayo ng videographer.
Right.
Okay, kasi they're gonna charge us harassment. Okay. So I specifically instructed my boarding team, when you board, you smile. You
Right.
smile.
Not to give them any,
You
don't
smile
be hostile,
and be
yeah.
courteous to the fisher folks. And they did. And also, kaya I think a few days later, I think Chinese embassy said, oh, they harass us. So, padala niyo yung video.
Right, right.
Siguro pinakita nila at that time. So, wala na yun, napatay siya. Second, I had a monitoring team doon, monitoring communications. Okay. So, ang advice ko, okay, monitor the signals or the communications traffic from the fisher folk, the Chinese fishing vessels going out. Unfortunately, wala akong interpreter. So, na-forensic na lang namin yung signal pag uwi na nung barko, nung Del Pilar. Okay. So, ang lumalabas doon, when we conducted the forensics of that, kumbaga, in-interpret na namin from Mandarin to English. So, ang lumalabas, nung first boarding namin, nung umaga, nagtawag na yung first boat na binoard namin, nagtawag na. Okay. Doon sa then kumbaga yung sabi doon sa radio traffic nila, ang response nung CMS was, we'll be there in 18 hours. Kumbaga malayo pa sila. Okay. Pangatlo, we were trying to prove gaano kabilis pag nagkaroon ng incident in Scarborough Shoal, tatawag yung embassy sa amin.
Right.
In Chinese embassy. So, kinoordinate ko yun sa intelligence staff namin. O sige, sabihan mo ako pag tinawagan na kayo ng Chinese embassy. So, binoard namin ng around 8 yung first fishing boat. Tumawag na sa kanila 11. So, 3 hours. Ang galing ang communications network nila.
Coordinated.
I mean, from the sea.
Yeah.
Umiikot, nakarating na sa embassy in 3 hours.
Wow, that was a quick.
Quick yun.
Yeah.
The patrol was also an information gathering mission in terms of looking at yung techniques and procedures nila.
So when did it go wrong? Because my understanding is that Gregorio Del Pilar was involved in making sure there's an apprehension of an illegal fishing. Isn't that the job of Coast Guard? How did it go wrong there?
Ang first problem we encountered is it's one Del Pilar, Del Pilar, and there are 9 ships, 9 boats. So
Right.
from a logistics perspective, ang lalaro sa utak mo how do I bring these 9 boats from Scarborough, let's say to the nearest one would be Subic. Uubusin niya yung boarding teams nung crew ng Del Pilar for that to be executed. So that was a problem. But na-overtaking kami ng events kasi by around the afternoon, tinawagan na kami. Okay, pull out na kayo, Coast Guard will take over.
But is it part of the mandate of the sovereignty patrols to apprehend illegal fishermen?
Yes, merong din. We try to stick within the parameters of UNCLOS
Right.
yung kumbaga as a coastal state,
Mga karapatan mo.
ano yung duties and responsibilities mo And actually, apprehending them is already an extreme
Yun nga
action.
I was wondering was that, sorry if I'm pushing you on this, but a part of me felt, but isn't that exactly what the Chinese were looking for? Kasi escalation dominance na mangyari dyan, di ba? Wasn't it an option for you guys to just say, okay, there are too many guys here, illegal, let's just file a diplomatic protest or something like
But
that?
we never went to that, hindi na umabot doon Kasi when we were asked to pull out na kami.
Right.
So
And the reason the Coast Guard, but later on, the Coast Guard comes in, right? My understanding was medyo may bagyo din yung panahon na yan, wala pa tayong multi-role vessels na...
That was, I think, 2-3 months later. Kasi remember, the incident was the incident was on April 12. So nagkaroon ng standoff.
For 2 months, June na.
Yeah.
I see. So it was not an issue initially then, in terms of So did the Coast Guard have a capability to make sure that they can do the apprehension of the illegal Chinese fishermen?
Well, at that time, it was no longer an issue of apprehension kasi nag-standoff na eh. Then, paramihan na ng barko yan.
Right.
Nag-converge na yung yung CMS, yung
Nag-armada moves na sila.
fishery law enforcement vessels nila.
Right. So, what you're saying, Admiral, is that the Chinese were just trying different kinds of ways to get their way, and then boom, the things aligned for them, right? They were able to get the most out of the crisis.
The way we assess it, ganito nangyari. In the first few days ng incident, the one running the show as far as China is concerned is yung regional o yung provincial nila.
Sa Fujian and
maybe Hainan.
Hainan, yeah, much closer, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a provincial thing for them. Okay. Umakyat na sa Beijing around maybe 3 days later. So when in the first few days nung incident, we were dealing with actions by the provincial or regional level type bureaucracy nila. Hindi pa siya na-elevate dun sa siguro sa sa CMC level.
Right, Zhongnanhai.
Okay. So yun yung doon. But that was on hindsight na. We learned about it a few months later na.
The reason I'm getting back to this, I know we want to talk about EDCA and all of that, but the reason is because I want to still get to the bottom of what was going on there. So I'm glad that I'm getting perspective from someone who knows what he's talking about, because you were kind of involved in the situation. What happened with the mutual disengagement plan, etc.? I think the former senator was also from Navy background and all, wasn't he?
Senator Sonny.
Yeah.
Out na kami doon eh. Kasi
ibang usapan niya.
Nung when they directed us to pull out, that means hands off na kami doon. So at that point, nung hawak pa namin yung mission, that was a tactical level mission. Okay. When Manila said, okay, pull out na kayo, in-elevate na sa Manila. That means national strategic na yung nagde-direct noon. So yung discussions doon in our headquarters, doon sa national government, then to Washington, wala na kaming doon. We were no longer privy to that.
So wait, so just to get the timing right, the mutual disengagement happened when you guys were no longer involved at all? So why would you have a mutual disengagement?
Yung disengagement na yun was between, I think yung Coast Guard na eh.
Oh, okay. So hindi ito disengagement. Oh, right. Okay. That's an important factor, because I see a lot of reports that suggest like the Trillanes intervention, diplomatic intervention, convinced essentially Gregoli del Pilar to pull out, cluster.
Okay, we were involved before the incident.
Right.
On the day of the incident up to 5 p.m.
This is May.
April 12.
April, yeah.
April 12.
Yeah. But the mutual disengagement is in June?
Months later.
Yeah.
Out na kami ron. Hindi na kami ko.
So it's the Coast Guard of the Philippines.
Yeah.
To release the fishermen and all of that. Okay, that's a very important one. Now, after the incident, after the whole crisis, and the Chinese now coming in and exercising administrative control, how did you feel about that? And what did you feel in terms of Philippines' options forward? Wasn't it Alasis, tell me if you're, because I mean you're retired already. I mean, one big concern also here was the Americans were supposedly not that helpful. I mean, I heard this from Americans themselves criticizing Kurt Campbell, for instance, among some other people involved in the bureaucracy, that they were not as forthcoming as they should have been. Because I remember very well, November 2011, just 6 months earlier, Obama, big speech in an Australian parliament, pivot to Asia and all of that. So I think that gave a sense to many allies like us that, hey, America will be there for us. But kind of the US was not there for us, right? Or you want to correct me? Because my sense is later on, people like Duterte made the most out of this. They juiced out the situation to say, see, walang saysay itong mga Amerikano, hindi tayo poprotektahan ng mga, hindi tayo... That's what I'm saying, because the Scarborough Shoal incident, as tragic as it was, it had also long-term political ramifications. So I just want to understand, how is your understanding of this dynamic?
To understand that, you have to take 1 or 2 steps back.
Yeah.
Okay, and kumbaga, get out of the yung biases mo doon.
Right.
Okay. If you look at we call it the value of the object. What is the value of that piece of object? Kumbaga, are you worth? Is that the value of that object enough to risk for you to risk. Kumbaga, calculation na ng risk yan eh. Okay, tayo si Pilipinas, tapos si China. Think economics. Ano yung value of the object ng Pilipinas versus yung China in terms of trade?
For the US, you mean?
For the US, I mean, for
Of
the
course.
US.
It doesn't compare. Yeah.
It doesn't compare. So, ibig sabihin, yung value of the object nila in their calculation, they need China more than us. Okay, masakit pakinggan, pero that's how politics is. Eh. That's how strategic calculations are made. Eh.
But that puts China above all of US allies, right? I mean, they have the biggest economy. They're one of the biggest trading partners, right? Okay.
Remember, their benefit at that time, that was at the height of yung Nixon doctrine. Eh. Yung we support China, peaceful rise.
Yeah.
So, andun pa yung context nun eh. Then, when you ask yung senior military personalities nung US, particularly yung PACOM at that time, 50-50 sila eh. 50% say China will become a problem.
Yeah.
Then 50% say China is a friend. So even within yung military structure nila sa Pacific Command, they're not...
Hindi pa siya Indo-Pacific
wala.
Hindi pa nga siya Indo-Pacific,
Hindi
right?
pa.
Yeah.
Actually, as much as there is criticism on kay President Trump, I think siya yung siya yung nakakita nung
He read the writing on the wall, right? That
Yeah.
China is a clear strategic competitor, if not rival.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
For some reason, na whether deliberate yung discernment niya or it was an accident
Yeah, culmination.
because of how Trump thinks.
Yeah.
But he got it right. Okay.
And Obama did not. That's your understanding. But of course, we're saying this with hindsight.
Hindsight,
right?
of course.
Yeah, of course. So what you're saying is, on one hand, it's just that for the Americans, they felt the risk was not worth it. But wasn't there another way for the U.S. to get involved, which was like, I don't know, at least send some drone in the area, some patrols in the air, just to, give a feeling to China that Philippines is not totally on its own. Because the reason I mention is because later on, nung nagkaroon ng harassment sa second Thomas Shoal, the Americans did kind of send some signals of support, right? And then 2015, they sent their defense secretary here, back then, Ash Carter, right? So, was that a correction of what you've...
I think that was a correction.
Correction na.
Correction na yan.
So, nag-sink in sa kanila na siguro kapos sila nung Scarborough. Kasi my understanding is that, correct me, Admiral, is that the Americans were encouraging us to negotiate this truce. So, in a way that kind of made President Aquino appreciate the intervention, kind of bolt from the blue from Senator Trillanes. I'm just trying to connect the dots here. I know this is not an I know this is a sensitive issue, but I just feel no one is talking about the details in ways we should, because this is a watershed moment for all of us, for China, for US, for the region.
The reason why hindi nahimay-himay yung Scarborough Shoal incident is iba yung lumabas na narrative, and the narrative is maybe 50-60% true.
Right.
But yung 40% nun, hindi naman napag-usapan eh. Kaya we're drawing the wrong lessons there sa Scarborough.
That's what I'm saying. So for you, from your understanding of the 40% that didn't come out in the mainstream, including academic understanding, now I feel bad because I have 2 books already on South China Sea. I want to make sure I'm fair. No, because I interviewed Senator Trillanes about it. And of course, he defended where he comes from. I talked to other people who blame him for everything. I remember very well, Enrile, Senate President, was attacking him. Na hard attack pa yata yung ambassador natin dun sa China. I mean, it was a mess. It was a total mess.
So, you got the glimpse of yung national strategic level.
Yeah.
But hindi naman tinanong yung tactical eh.
Exactly, and now I'm having this opportunity to...
hindi naman tinanong eh. So,
and media didn't make an effort. I'm not to remember a single source I saw that goes at the tactical, intermediate level. People talking to people like you who are really somehow calling the shots at the operational level, right?
yeah. So, kaya nung we were drawing the wrong lessons.
So what is the right lesson based on your understanding of the full picture?
Well, number one, dun is, and I think we got it right naman when we started that mission.
Right.
We contextualized it as a sort of a maritime law enforcement mission. Okay. And as much as we can, kasi we planned for it eh. Hindi naman hindi naman accidental yung mission na yun eh. It took us months to plan for that mission. Kumbaga, sinet up namin yun eh. na-set up
So hindi
namin.
siya bara-bara, yeah.
Hindi siya bara-bara.
Yeah.
And I have my lawyer, yung staff lawyer namin, yung staff legal,
Right.
providing advice. Sir,
Right.
ito yung ano nyo. Okay, under UNCLOS, ano yung pwede natin gawin, ano hindi natin pwede gawin. But somewhere down the line, from a maritime law enforcement mission, nung naka-pull out na kami, it became a sovereignty issue. So, that was the escalation. Ang amin is just keep it as they're fishermen conducting things that are by nature illegal. And maybe environmental degradation at the most, yung ano.
Right.
Because they were harvesting yung corals. Eh. But nung nilevel up natin to a sovereignty issue, then escalation na yun.
So what is the lesson to learn from the Scarborough? What did we get wrong? What can we improve? Or what did we get wrong about what we think we got wrong? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. If you were to give an advice, the sitting Philippine president...
Follow the chain of command. Tapos, let the tactical people do their job.
Okay.
Kasi nawalan na kumbaga, in the hierarchy of bosses, if ikaw yung pinakamataas, then you assume accountability, responsibility. If something went wrong, you cannot pass the buck. Kasi inaccept mo na lahat. Eh.
Right, in command responsibility.
So, sa amin, nung we were on hindsight, ang ano namin doon isa, they should have let us pursue the mission.
Do your job.
Do our job. Then siguro, they can blame us later naman eh. Or fire us. Kumbaga, you did wrong. Ganyan. At least, salo namin yung accountability sa tactical level. But pag kinuha mo yung mission at the national strategic, then in-elevate mo, in-escalate mo na
So
actually.
you're saying there was a premature elevation of the issue to a national sovereignty security? Because I'm just trying to be fair to the former president and also the late President Aquino, because my sense is the Chinese kind of forced it upon his administration when then the embassy and everyone tried to get involved when it went all the way to Zhongnanhai and all the noise that Hu Jintao administration made around it.
I'm not going to say nagkamali sa taas kasi they are seeing things na hindi namin alam eh.
Okay. Yeah.
So, kumbaga, in the hierarchy of things, when you're the man on the balcony, okay, mas malaki yung ano mo eh, mas broader
kita
yung
mo,
appreciation
yeah.
mo. Kami naman sa baba, we're only looking at yung tactical. Maliit lang yung ano namin eh, yung vista namin eh.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you very much, Admiral, retired Rear Admiral Ong. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Very kind of you. Parang kulang ang 2 hours, no? I think we need
3-4
go
hours.
for 4 hours, 5 hours, and all. Thank you very much for that. So catch us again next week on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and other podcast platforms. I am Richard Heydarian, and that is The View from Manila. We are One News, all sides, all the time.